So welcome to lecture today. Again, today is a special lecture. It's supposed to happen on Tuesday, of course, but since the weather nixed that, we took Tuesdays and Thursdays lectures and we switched them around. Today, like for the last 3 years or so, I've asked somebody from the Writing Center to come in and work with me on giving a presentation on technical writing and in particular the importance of design and communication in computer science. So it's discipline specific, but it does apply to many disciplines. Charlotte is with me today, and she was here last year as we were talking about it. This presentation was one of the last ones before everything got shut down last year. So hopefully it'll go just as well as last year, and we'll be opening up afterwards. All right, so please go ahead.
All right. Okay, so my name is Charlotte Hupsch, and I'm an assistant director of the UNL Writing Center. Our physical location is over in Andrews Hall, although that doesn't matter very much this semester because we are doing everything online right now. But for the future, good to know. So I'm a PhD student in English, and sort of in between when I graduated from college and when I went back to school for my master's degree, I worked as a technical writer at Epic, which is a healthcare software company. So that's a little bit of my background on sort of how I've gotten into tech writing and the experiences that I have with it. Let me know if at any point, I haven't taught since like October in a mask, so just like raise your hand if at any point you can't hear me or I'm a little bit muffled because I'm still getting used to it. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things from writing and some practices we have in the Writing Center and how they can work with what you do over here. So the first thing I want to talk about is why you should listen, so why you as computer scientists and software engineers should care about writing. First of all, of course, because I'm getting a PhD in writing, I'm a big advocate of like writing is everywhere and we should care about it just because it's all over in our lives. But if that is not convincing enough for you, you should care because employers care, right? So these data that I'm going to show you in a sec are from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So that's an association that collects data from employers about the job market and what they value and what their perception is of their employees coming in and how good they are at those skills that they value. So these are data from about 200 employers, everybody from the Red Cross to Apple. So what this chart tells you is what employers consider professional skills. So all of these things on the left, the things that they're looking for, and how good the candidates they get are at those skills. So the four I want to draw your attention to the most because I think it kind of meshes with what we do in the Writing Center. Teamwork and collaboration, everybody loves those things. Critical thinking, problem solving, sort of murky stuff to define, but everybody loves those too. Professionalism, and then oral and written communication. So obviously I'm going to focus more on this last one, oral and written communications. Almost 96% of the employers in this study say that oral and written communication is considered essential. But it's not so good when we look at how they rate new employees and how ready they are for their careers. That's at about 40% of employees they would rate as proficient. So in addition to just being like a thing that is important in everyday communication as a human, focusing on writing and being able to communicate is also extremely important later on in your career field.
I would echo that these same sentiments are always coming out in student advisory boards, student advisory panels, and our IAP, our industry advisory board. And they echo these all the time. And it's not just about technical writing, as in what you're doing in this class right now with a technical design document. It could be just as simple as writing a memo or composing a well-formatted email. You don't just throw in a bunch of emojis. You keep it professional and stuff like that. And that's also what they're talking about with respect to oral and written communication, not just technical but professional.
Yeah, I would say the other thing that I think a lot, or I talk to people a lot about in the Writing Center is I think sometimes the way that school is set up can sort of obfuscate the necessity of writing. So for quite a few people, the writing projects they do in school are fairly simple and they can do them, like it doesn't seem that difficult. So a lot of people who come into the Writing Center say, yeah, I don't really draft. I don't like write a first draft and then revise and do a second draft. I sort of just word vomit on the page and turn it in and I get A's and that's fine. And that's fine, like in some situations, if you can do that, like good for you. I could do it too. And then I like went out into the world and got a job as a tech writer. And it was a very different situation because it was harder and I was trying to convey information that was more complicated and it was higher stakes. Because it was my job and also because it was like healthcare software that I was trying to teach people who are very busy how to use. And so the words were higher stakes, the communication was higher stakes, and I needed the skills that I hadn't given myself a chance to develop like when I was in college. So as you get into higher stakes situations, even if you feel like you don't need some of these like writing tools right now, it's a good idea to sort of foster those skills now because you are gonna end up probably needing them as the situations change in your job and in your life. So basically what we're going to do today, we're going to spend some time talking about the parallels between coding and writing. So in addition to writing just being a useful tool and a necessary one for a lot of your future careers, it also has a lot of similarities to just coding. We're going to talk about reverse outlines, how they can help you write, how they can help you in your coding as well. And then we're going to do some analysis of design documents, which you're going to be doing for this class, and how they work to communicate your code. And so these are also 3 skills that we use a lot in the Writing Center. So again, stuff that is going to help you like in this class and in coding, but also in writing as well. Okay, so in writing good code is like writing a novel. The author posits that the process of writing code and the process of writing a novel are in fact very similar. And in one section, the author focuses on drafts. So what we're going to do right now is do something that we do a lot in the Writing Center, which is free writing. You might have heard of this, but basically it's just you're giving yourself some time to just like word vomit on the page and not have to worry about what it looks like. This is also a great way to get started with like writing projects. If you don't know where to start, often free writing is a good way to just like turn your brain on and signal that like now's the time to think. So what I want you to do is I'm going to give you about 4 minutes and just free write. You don't have to show this to anybody, so it can be on your laptop, on a piece of paper, or whatever. Think about how you draft an essay or any piece of writing. So what are the steps you take from like the moment the assignment is announced in class or you read it on Canvas, from that first conceptual idea to the final draft, sort of what is your process? And then think about how are these steps similar to your coding process. So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do that.
And those of you at home or watching the recording, please do the same. I'll add that this kind of exercise is extremely useful if you just have basically, you have the term writer's block, right? You don't know where to start. All right, well, here's how you just start your stream of consciousness, just putting crap down. It's not going to be good stuff, right? And that's okay because it's your first draft. You're going to go back and revise that stuff, but it gets you over that hurdle, right? It gets you past that inertia of being at rest. How do you get? I mean, it's much easier when you're going 60 miles an hour to maintain 60 miles an hour than it is to go from 0 miles an hour up to 60 miles an hour. So in writing, how do you do that? Well, you just free write. You just start putting stuff on the page, stream of consciousness. And remember, if you are at home, we do have Piazza live Q&A. I will be exiting out of the presentation often to check it if you do have questions at home. Right. Nothing so far. I interviewed there many years ago.
Did they offer you a job?
Yeah, I didn't take it.
Yeah, it was like 2 years. It was a really good job for like straight out of college.
Yeah,
to just like they train you on everything.
If I didn't already have a family after that, I probably would have.
Right. Yeah. It like completely changed the way I think about writing too. Like when I went back to school, it was very like, especially going to academia, which tends to be more verbose and like
Right.
needlessly complex sometimes from being a tech writer. I was like, edit. But I'm from Wisconsin originally, so
Okay.
it was also,
Yeah, I think I interviewed not in the dead of winter, but
yeah,
it's like spring, but it was still cold, so it's like,
it's a big change. Their campus is, you can get around all indoors though, like the tunnels,
oh yeah.
skywalks and stuff. It's wild.
They have the themed buildings, like Harry Potter building there.
Yeah.
They were building that at the time
Yep.
when I went there.
Yeah, they were. I think they had just finished some of them when I
Okay.
left. I was in the farm campus.
Yeah, they bust us out in the middle of nowhere except for like new developments. So
Yep.
I'm sure it's all built up.
It's very different now. Yeah, it's wild how much has changed. And they have, I think, 10,000 employees now.
I wasn't keeping time.
Oh yeah, I am.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yep. We got
great.
like a minute left.
All right.
I was pleasantly surprised to get the email about, I didn't realize we were going to be in 1B as higher educate for the vaccinations.
Oh, yeah.
As higher ed people, I thought it was going to just be K-12. It's a nice email to receive.
I definitely want like some button, like you
Yeah.
voted.
Yeah.
I want a button. You'll still have to wear your mask, I
Right.
think, but you put it right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been vaccinated. How
Right.
about you?
All right, take maybe like 10 or 20 more seconds just to wrap up whatever thought you're currently on and come back to focus on class here. All right, so if you are watching virtually, maybe you could type in the chat a few things, and if you're here, hopefully you will volunteer. It's been a while since I've encouraged students in person to participate, so if you could just participate, that would help me out. But so what are some steps you take? What's your writing process look like? Let's start with that one, and then we'll hop on over to coding and what your coding, or how the similarities are between them.
Well, for me, what I did was I just started just jumping right into it. I didn't really plan it out. I didn't really know what to write about, so I just defaulted to writing about chess. So I just started writing about the history of chess, how it's becoming more popular today, and then I just kept writing and writing, pulling on what I know about it. And then if there was like a more specific fact I wanted later on, I would kind of like make a mental note to look that up later, but I just kept going.
Yeah, so diving right in and just getting started. Yeah, a lot of people do that. And that's sort of similar if you're going to go back and edit later, right? Sort of similar to what we do when we free write. In the back?
I always start by jotting down ideas on the general subject I'm writing about, and then I want to see if I can combine some of those ideas into a more cohesive thesis, and then I think that has a great deal of parallels to code.
Yeah, so sort of outlining a little bit first, maybe like informal way of outlining, jotting down some general ideas, sort of looking for a thesis, and parallels to coding. Do we have anybody on the?
Not right now.
Okay.
But
Yeah, go for it.
I want to do diagrams more like visual learners. So kind of what I do is I just diagram like the main parts of what I want to do, and then in between those main parts, I can either blow up if I need to do this within the main part or that within the main part, or something of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So diagramming, drawing things out. I'm doing a lot of that too as I work on my comprehensive exams where I'm doing like a ton of reading and then I have to sort of make something out of all the text I'm reading. There's a lot of maps up on my walls right now in my apartment. It looks a little bit chaotic. Okay, so thoughts on how this might be similar to coding. I know you talked about that you could see some parallels with coding processes.
In the case of what I did, perhaps it's sometimes a good idea to just have something down so that you can fix it up later, because it's better to have something in front of you than to have nothing and just completely think in hypotheticals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so getting something on the page to start with is better than being faced with a completely empty page, empty screen. Yeah, absolutely. Other parallels that you see?
I'm going off of that. When you just get something down, it can often give you a better idea of what the problem actually entails, because then you're like, oh, this method won't work because of these reasons I didn't see first.
Exactly. And note that's an excellent thing to include in your design document, because there are sections at the end of every major section. There's alternative designs that you might have thought of initially, and no, that was garbage. Throw it out. But why? Document that, right? It's kind of like the old Stack Overflow questions that I have a question, I need it resolved. Okay, I solved it. And then 6 years later, somebody else comes back with the exact same problem. They never said why, what the problem was, and now they're in the same boat. When you document bad designs or as alternative designs, then that tells the future generations or whatever that inherit and have to maintain your system, don't go down that road. We went down that road and it didn't work, and here's why.
And I think this is another situation where I'm assuming it's going to be the same for coding, although I don't have a lot of direct experience in coding. Sometimes those notes are also for yourself, and as the project gets bigger, it becomes more important to leave yourself sort of a trail for what you did. Because when you're writing something, if you're writing like a one-page response paper or reflection or something, you're just doing it all at once. It's quick. You know why you included what you included, and then you don't have to think about it. But as the projects get bigger and bigger, you will forget why you did the thing that you did, and you will send yourself in circles trying to figure out exactly why you took those turns. Again, another thing that I am intimately familiar with right now as I look at the notes that previous Charlotte left for current Charlotte, which are not always great. So I'm trying to get better at that. But yeah, leaving yourself sort of a trail.
And online we have a comment that you get the main structures in place first, and then that allows you to go and tackle the details one by one. It allows you to focus and localize on one thing instead of being bogged down by the big picture. Once you've got the big picture down, then you can start focusing on actual implementations by focusing on smaller things, right? But if you're always if you're always focusing on the big thing first, right? You're looking at the 6 pages in your of description in your in your next assignment, and you're looking at all as a whole. You're never going to get started. But free writing, or just starting to get things down, like designing your test cases, that's a small part. That's a way to get started.
Yeah. So this is all just to say, like, there are parallels going on here, and as you think about your coding process, it can be helpful to go back in your head and remind yourself of things that you learned about writing. Maybe you haven't taken a writing class more recently, but things, sort of those foundational things that we even learn in like K-12 can be really helpful as we think about how to compose in other aspects too. And of course, as you're doing writing projects for this class and for other classes, this stuff can be helpful as well. Yeah,
Okay.
let's go back. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is reverse outlining, which is something we do all of the time in writing. It's something I'm always trying to get my writing students to do more of. So we usually think of outlining as something that we do before we start a paper, so kind of the idea of like, I think about the structure and what it's going to look like, and then I plan it out. But I think like the reason that some of us just sort of start typing, right, is because we don't know enough about what we're doing to make like a full, complete, beautiful outline before we start. And even if we do make that full, complete outline before we start anything, often we'll end up taking diversions from it, because as you write, you learn things, right? As you think it out, you learn more stuff, and it'll change. So instead, we're going to focus on reverse outlines. So with a reverse outline, you're going to start with a complete draft. Doesn't have to be a good draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be, here's what it is. And you go through and you number your paragraphs or your chunks, right? And you summarize the function of each paragraph in one sentence. So this is not necessarily the same as the content, but what this paragraph is actually doing, why you included it. And often this is something we sort of know subconsciously, but we don't articulate. So that's why this can be helpful. So here is an example of actually one of my former coworkers was writing some job applications and started writing a cover letter. And I think that professional documents are a great example of this because we often pay more attention to the function of a paragraph in a cover letter because we're like, okay, I have to do A, B, and C. So she writes, I'm writing with great enthusiasm to apply for the position of Learning Commons Supervisor. I'm currently the Associate Director of the Writing Center at UNL. That's the first paragraph. Second paragraph, I have 7 years of experience providing tutoring, admin support in a Learning Commons environment. As Associate Director at UNL, I'm responsible for supervising staff of undergrads and grads who meet individually with students, staff, and faculty across the disciplines to conference about their writing. My responsibilities include, and then she goes on to describe those. Let's go to the next one. So in this first paragraph, she is introducing herself and her purpose to the reader. That's sort of the function of this, right? And then in the second one, you want to hit that?
Sorry.
Thank you. Explaining why I am qualified for the job. So like I said, it's a little bit more obvious when we're working with job materials because we tend to know right away, okay, I need to like introduce myself, say I'm applying for the position, give my qualifications, give some experience, that sort of stuff. But we do this every time we write, even if it's just my introduction needs to give my thesis. My first body paragraph needs to explain my first point. Now I need to provide some evidence through examples, and I'm going to do that here. So we often know the function, but it can help to articulate it so that we can see exactly what parts we're doing. Because I think sometimes we get lost between the function of what we're doing and the content. Like we get so bogged down in the content of like, oh, I need to give like this story from when I was growing up or whatever, that we don't think about what am I actually trying to do with that story. And sometimes between there's a mismatch of like, do I need to talk about this story from when I was growing up? Does it have a function? Or is it just something I kind of think I need to include? So what we're going to do now is try reverse outlining code. So the exact same concepts, but applied to a slightly different medium.
So this is the exercise that we were using over the first couple of weeks to introduce Java. It's a prior exercise that I've used in this course before. And you remember that it's a suffix array where you've got an input like science, and then all of the suffixes are built by simply just taking off successive letters at the beginning until you get down to the last one. And then you have to sort that in lexicographic order. So for an input of science, you would output the thing on the right-hand side there. Good? So here's some code. This is very, very similar to the code that we wrote. It's maybe a little bit cleaner, cleaned up, might be a little bit shorter. Of course, it doesn't have the boilerplate stuff around it, but it achieves the problem, right? Or it solves the problem. So.
Yeah, so we're just going to give you a couple minutes and just on your notes, on your scratch paper, or on your laptops, just reverse outline this code. So remember, you're going to number the paragraphs or the chunks of code, right? And then focus on what their function is. So I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Maybe go into presentation mode to make it a little bigger for them.
Sure.
Helped a little.
Bottom left and bottom right will be cut off anyway for
Gotcha.
streaming.
Yeah, I'll have, before we go to the next one, I'll have you have them walk through what they.
Okay, sure. So hopefully you remember that this was not how we started. This is a reverse outline, right? When I started presenting this problem, we actually did I don't know if we call them just a regular outline, a forward outline, right? Where I said we have to, create our list of elements. We have to iterate through each suffix, build the suffix, add it to the list. Then we have to sort it, and then we have to iterate through and print them all out, right? So hopefully that's the outline that you came up with. Does anybody have a more detailed outline? No? Okay. Well, there's basically what we did, right? Now these aren't numbered. We numbered them in code using comments. But we numbered it, 1, create the collection of suffixes from the command line argument. And that in itself was 2 sub-steps, basically. So these aren't numbered here like 1, and then you would indent, right? A, B, C, right? Again, parallels to code. With code indentation, that means that you've got, it's kind of like an outline where you've got this idea, this idea, this idea, and then sub-ideas to it in a for loop or something like that. You indent that, right? So even the formatting parallels these outlines right here, right? Then you sort the collection, you print the collection to the standard output, right? So, next.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to have you take like a minute or 2 maybe and just make a stab at reverse outlining this code.
And in case it's not clear, this solves the exact same problem. This is compiling code, this is running code, and it outputs the exact same thing. So at home, it's going to get cut off a little in the bottom left, but it doesn't really matter. So where are you even going to start with this one? Probably at the top, right?
I'm going to start from the bottom. We're printing out a result. What is that result? Just working my way up.
What are some problems here? What are some immediate problems with I guess the second line? Say what? There's dead code, right? There was code that was put in there at some point because they thought, that they were printing something out instead of doing proper debugging, and then they took it out because it was a mistake code, but they left it in there. Do you do that with drafts? Do you say, okay, well, I'm going to take this sentence out, and you just cross it out, but do you leave the crossed out version when you turn in your paper to your English professor? No. We don't. In coding, we call that, if you've never heard of the term before, cruft, right? C-R-U-F-T. And there's a history to that word that I won't get into right now, but it's basically, or another word is kludge, right? This is complete kludge. It is clutter. It is garbage code, right? Can you even tell what? I mean, it's got some nice white spacing, right? It's got some chunks, but any one of those chunks, can you tell what it's doing just by looking at it? No. This is not self-documenting code, right? The code should tell you just by hopefully by a glance what it is doing or what the intention of what it was doing. This is not good at all, right? And this is an amalgamation of actual submissions from that year that I used this. It wasn't just one submission that did this. I took the worst aspects of the worst submissions and I combined them all into one terrible example.
Frankenstein taught us a lesson about this.
Exactly. It's Frankenstein code. It's duct taped together. Right?
I will also say that like the same thing happens when we're writing too, just in terms of like, it's not bad writing, it's just writing that you need to revise and go back to and figure out what you're trying to say. Because the same things you do where you tried code and it didn't work, or you tried something and you realized it wasn't going to work, so you moved on to something else. We do that when we're writing too, which is why sometimes people will say, I don't know what my thesis statement is until I finished writing the paper. Like, I don't know what the paper is about until I've explored it. And why sometimes essays that students will turn in, instead of going, we could argue about whether essays are actually linear, but whatever. Instead of going like sort of in a line, they kind of loop around and take some side tracks and stuff as the writer tries to figure out what it is that they're talking about. So same thing happens all the time in writing. Okay, so as you approach, have they gotten to first drafts
Yeah,
yet
your
for-
first draft is due tomorrow at midnight. And again, hopefully, it was intended that this would be on Tuesday, but that doesn't matter, remember, because these are drafts. You get credit for simply handing in the draft, like 5 points, so 5% of the actual paper, which translates to what, 0.5% of your final grade. You get that simply for handing something in. The more substantial, there have been several questions online about this, and the more substantial your draft, the more feedback we can give you, right? But we're not expecting perfection, right? That's why it's completion. You do the draft, you get your 5 points. We give you feedback. You go back to the drawing board, drafting board, and you rewrite it, right? Because we're going through a process here with a bunch of sprints, with a bunch of different phases of the project. You will naturally, unless you have the project done right now, 100%, you're going to go back and revise that document as we go along.
And I think sort of that iterative process of like maybe starting before you know exactly what you're doing and then needing to get feedback and go back and redo it. It's one of the things that make people feel like they hate writing or that writing sucks, because it's a complex process, and to get something that looks smooth usually takes a lot of work. I will also say, like, this is something that, and I imagine the same is true in some ways for coding. As you become a better writer, whatever that is, it doesn't mean that you don't do all that sort of iterative process, and it doesn't mean you're still not putting out like first drafts that are a huge mess and don't work the way you want them to. You just get better at revising and going back to it and figuring out how to smooth it out. But it is always extremely painful, I think, for many writers to go through the process, right? So, and I imagine some version of the same thing is true in coding. You still have to start somewhere, and you're still going to be going back and adding to it or figuring out what's working and what's not working. So one thing that may help you with this project, but also all the writing projects you have to do for this class, for other classes and other settings, is beginning with these 3 questions in mind. So first of all, what are you writing? What is the thing? That seems pretty obvious, but sometimes we don't think about goals. What do I need to achieve with this? This happens, I think, a lot in classes or in workplaces. If your supervisor or your professor or your TA tells you to do something, sometimes you're just like, okay, doing the thing, and you don't really think about like why are they telling me to do it? What is the goal of it? Maybe sometimes the goal is not as clear to you, but often there is a very specific reason they want you to do this, right? Who is it for? This is easy in school because it's usually for your teacher, but often there's also a second audience too, like it's for your teacher so that they can evaluate you so that you can get a grade, but it's also, there's usually a secondary audience of like, imagine this is for X person. Obviously, as you get out into the workforce and other sort of non-school writing situations, it'll be a little bit clearer who your audience is. But again, this is not always, sometimes we take it for granted, sometimes we just, okay, doing the thing, and we don't stop to think about who's actually going to use this, what sort of knowledge do they have, what kinds of things should I include for them, what do I need to scale up or scale down in terms of the level of details, that sort of thing. And then why is it important? So related to the other 2, but why is it important? Who's going to use it? What are the stakes on this document? And especially thinking about writing, that'll help you figure out like, this is a very low stakes thing that like you're only one other person is going to see, and that person is like a friend or something. Obviously it's going to be very different than like a very high stakes thing that's going to people that are very high up, or something that's like 95% of your grade, right? So why is it important? Hopefully at this point, because it's due tomorrow, you know all of these answers for the design document. But let's get into it just a little bit. So what are you writing? What is sort of the goal of the design document?
Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, the purpose of the design document is to explain what your project does, break it down, explain it to anybody else who might want to use your program later on.
Right, and that also goes to the second answer there of who is it for? It's for a technically minded audience, right? It's not, write it in character, right? One of the biggest mistakes that people make is writing it, and well, Dr. Burke told us to do this, and this is why we did this. No, write it in character like you were a real developer, because you are real developers, but that you had a real client, and that you were and that you are creating this design document so that a technically competent person would be able to take that design and repeat your implementation without ever seeing your code, right? So they should be able to look at this design document and say, okay, they've obviously got these classes. You don't need to tell us about what object-oriented programming is. If you're speaking to another experienced programmer, if you're another developer, they know what object-oriented programming is. They know what Java is. Eventually you'll know too what a database is, what SQL is. You don't have to explain the basics. You don't have to repeat what I say in class. That's not the purpose of the document. The purpose of the document is to describe your design, why you did it, how you tested it, to somebody else who can then pick up your work and not even see your code and then repeat your design and implement it themselves, say in C# or something like that, and come out with a program or come out with a system that exactly has the same functionality as your system, just in a completely different language. Right?
And I think, so like these sound like very simple questions, and particularly for an assignment that you all already know about and hopefully have already at least like thought about, if not started. But honestly, I think maybe 50% of the people that I talk to in the Writing Center who are struggling with some piece of writing, and I think the same is true when I talk to like friends, colleagues, stuff like that, is that there's some kind of confusion somewhere in here about what the actual purpose is, because that dictates, like I said, what level of information you'll include, what type of information you'll include, who the audience is. People often get lost in like what kind of information people need to see. Or particularly, I've been working with a lot of people working on like grad school applications or something. Thinking about the audience there is really important too, not just in terms of like what do they need to see from you, but I always say like imagine them with a whole huge stack of applications. What is everybody going to say in their application, and how can you make yourself stand out? But these are things we often don't think about just because we get so hit over the head with like the difficulty of just figuring out like a high stakes piece of writing, or just the urgency of like, I have to do this assignment or this work task by tomorrow or something, and we don't stop and think about what am I writing, what's the purpose, and who's my audience, and then why is it important? These are always questions that it is okay to ask a professor or a boss or whoever's giving you some kind of writing assignment. Just what is the big goal of this, and who is my audience? No one's ever going to like look down on you for asking those incredibly smart questions, and it can save you some time. That's also an important question, like I was saying, to ask, I think in the school context where you're sort of pretending to be somebody else, and that can cause some confusion when you're trying to figure out what voice to write it in or what you're supposed to do. I think it's always totally fine to email a TA or a professor and say, hey, who is this for? Am I sort of writing from my voice as a student, or am I writing as someone else in sort of an imagined situation? So if you did not know these answers, besides asking a professor, a TA, an instructor, where else could you go in this class if you don't know the answers to these questions?
No? Where did you read about it this first? In Canvas, right?
So, yeah, so in Canvas, and in classes that are designed with a little bit of thought, this stuff will always be on Canvas or readily accessible to you, particularly now when we're doing half online, half in person. In this class, it should be on Canvas. The date will be different, but under Overview and Requirements, that's where you're going to find some more information. I think if we hop to the next one.
Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, so the design document should be clear and comprehensive enough that a reasonably technically competent person could reproduce your system design. Maybe not every detail, but with identical functionality without access to your actual code. And you'll be evaluated on how well the design document achieves this principle. You'll also be evaluated on your technical writing skills. And there's a list of that more under Overview and Requirements. Besides a prompt or a list of requirements, what other kinds of things would help you figure out how to write something for the first time, or like encounter a new kind of document, new genre? What else might you want? This question may be too easy because it's right here. You might want some examples, right?
So one thing that I changed this year is that we still have that professional example up. I believe that it's, that'd be nice to get one from Epic if you have one that you can share, but I think it is from an actual company, the professional example. It's from one of the big software development companies, I forget which one. But the student examples from past semesters have been removed. Simply because traditionally what I would do is I would take the top 3 versions at the end of the semester, and then I would use them in the next semester as, here are your exemplars, right? These are the ones that got a really good grade, and that if you follow what they did by reading their examples, you should be good. Unfortunately, far too many people, especially even towards their final draft, would just simply plagiarize. And I mean, the low-level plagiarism of just cutting and pasting everything and not even changing it at all, like talking about last year's project was not the same as this project this year. This year, of course, we're doing the video game store inventory system and sales system. They still had text in there referring to the previous years, which was like a financial application system. So I've taken those out simply because it was far too common to simply just wrote, and even if it wasn't, just copy paste of actual text, it was, I'm going to structure it exactly like this, even if it didn't match what they were actually doing with their actual code. So I want that to be from scratch, basically, this semester. If you want an example, we've got an example there, that professional example. No way should is yours expected to look like that professional example. I believe that that's a 20-page document. We're not expecting a 20-page document. We're not expecting something where we're giving you a $1 million contract for this design document or something like that. It's just an example that this is what it actually looks like. And in fact, I think the next slide has an excerpt from that professional-looking example. So.
Right, and I think just to speak to that with examples, I definitely have the same problem in like just my writing classes. No matter how many times I tell folks that the previous examples are not like, in some cases they're not even A papers, they're just doing something interesting. People will still sort of copy the turns of phrase. And honestly, I think it goes back to those 3 questions, people not quite understanding who it's for or what the purpose is. If they get confused somewhere, I think it's a normal human reaction to just do what the example has done. But if you don't understand why they're making those choices, then you end up looking a little foolish, right? So the way that I always try to get people to think about examples is doing the reverse outlining thing and breaking it down into functions. What is the writer doing here? Not that you need to use the same turns of phrase, the same number of bullets, but what is the writer actually trying to achieve in each piece of the writing? So what I'm going to have you do is take 3 or 4 minutes and just try to reverse outline this design document, the design overview section. So again, focus not so much on content, but just like what is the function of each piece of this. So I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. And if you're attending digitally, make sure to do that as well.
32 pages.
I believe at Epic they're still using monks.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
That won't go away.
There's some original code too from like the 80s when Judy Faulkner started it.
And those can be very lucrative positions, like RPG or old COBOL code still. That if you can, those are very secure positions.
Yeah.
As long as they stick with the system.
Places that have
But the second the systems go away, you're gone.
Right. Yeah. It's they're big. I think more than 50% of the country's medical systems are on Epic. Now, UNMC definitely is.
Okay. I remember at the time, I think that there were 3 big ones, and then they said that we want to take over the other two,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
So it sounds like they're on their way.
yeah, yep. Let's have you take like 30 more seconds, and if you're not like through the whole thing, that's totally fine. Okay, so how did reverse outlining this design document go? Was it easy? Was it hard? Kind of hard?
Because I don't really know what this purpose of this project is. It's kind of hard to know why a lot of the stuff is included if you don't know what the project is for.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So that's one difference from the way that you guys will be doing it. What else makes it easy or hard to reverse outline this?
In some way, it's easy because it's kind of self-documenting. It lays itself out in a very intuitive structure on, okay, these are the phases, and then these are our 3 goals.
So for those at home that didn't maybe hear, is that it's kind of self-documenting. It lays itself out. What are the key aspects that told you that this is the layout, that told you that this was a technical writing document? Do you see a lot of exposition? Do you see a lot of paragraphs? No, what do you see? Bullet points, right? You see clear titles and numbered titles, 2.1, 2.2, right? You see, like in that, I think we focus on which one? The
I
approach?
think we zoom in, yeah.
Zoom
we
in?
into
Okay.
the approach.
What kind of sentence structures are those? I mean, granted, it's boring reading, right? It's not poetry, but
So in writing, we might call this parallel structures, right? So during the requirements phase, we do this. During the system design phase, we do this. During the construction phase, we do this. So it sort of teaches you how to read it as you go. So maybe when you approach this, like you said, right, you don't know you don't know the specifics of this particular project, which can make it a little bit harder to get into, right, when you don't have a starting point. But once you get into it and look at the actual language, it teaches you how to read it. You're giving your reader sort of tools of what to expect, and you're making it super easy for them. I don't think any chunk of text in that whole thing was more than like a couple sentences long. And when there's bullets, you're not just looking at an example and saying, oh, they used bullets, so I should use bullets. You're sort of looking at what your content demands and saying, I have 4 things I need to explain to the reader. Do I want to write them out in a paragraph, or is it simpler for the reader if I put them into bullets, right? So things like the sentence structure, even things like, this is a little bit in the weeds, but even things like where you put the verb in the sentence, so the most important stuff is coming first, so the reader understands quickly how to situate themselves in the sentence, where the action is, that kind of stuff. And it's pretty concise, right?
Right.
They're not using a lot of words.
Concise, terse, just like code should be, right? You should not have any superfluous lines of code in a program. Technical writing, technical documents, you don't need a lot. You don't need to repeat yourself. DRY, don't repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself in technical writing either, right? Just give just enough to convey your idea, and you don't have to, like if I were writing an English essay or a book, and usually what I'll do is I'll go through and, did I use the same term more than 5 times in this page? All right, and I need to pull out my thesaurus and come out with a different word. That's perfectly fine here, because this is just technical writing. during the systems phase, during this phase, during this phase. Repeat, repeat, repeat. It's consistency, it's conciseness, terseness, and on the next slide here, a picture says 1,000 words, right? This is called an ER diagram, entity relation diagram. When we get to the database phase, of course, you'll be generating something like this. And it just gives you a map, right? You mentioned visual learner before. Imagine if you had to write this out in text, explaining what the design of this is. That'd be like 4 or 5 pages of text, text, text. Nobody's going to read that, right? And if they are going to read that, then they are going to get lost because you lose that visualization of it. This kind of visualization allows you to see the whole picture and at once, and then also to zoom in on any one particular part of the system at the same time, right? And only one figure instead of page after page after page of writing. Right?
Yeah, so kind of on a similar note in terms of like conciseness and what a technical document is for, the thing that I wrote it on the whiteboard in my office when I was a tech writer, is that analysts who were my users, who were reading the stuff I was writing, don't like to read. You're not writing something for somebody who really wants to read like a lot. You're writing for somebody who, especially in this case, might be skimming, might be just looking for particular takeaways. If they are reading closely, they're not reading for like the pleasure of reading, right? This is a document that's made to be used. So make it as easy as possible for them to get the information that they need, and just think about what do they need to know, what do they don't need to know. A lot of times what you run into with tech writing is because you know something, or because you had to like go figure it out and it took you a while, you feel like you want to explain it. So again, you always have to go back to your audience and think like, okay, who is this for? Maybe they already know it, or if they don't, do they need it to fit with the purpose of this document? So try to be mindful about what you're including. Some of that, it is a process, right? So some of that you're going to get feedback to add things or take things out. That's a good reason to follow, again, sort of those writing steps of like asking for feedback, asking for review from other people before you turn something in, because they can help you find that stuff that you can't find yourself. The other thing I'll say about being clear and concise is that it's a skill that you'll get better at the more you do it. It may not come naturally right away to just figure out. I mean, the first part of it is you have to know what your point is before you can say it clearly. So sometimes, just like we saw with the code, you'll loop around a little bit, and then later you'll be like, oh damn, it's like one sentence, and I've been trying to do this in like 4 or 5. What I generally tell people is the first way to try to write it is just the way you would say it. Like, try to just write it the way you would say it. See if it may be like not quite the formality you want, but it may give you the structure to explain how it works that you can then, elevate the vocabulary a little bit if it's like a professional setting where you need to. But start just by writing it the way you would say it.
And that's another parallel with what I've been telling you, right? That if you need to understand something and you don't understand it, what do? Well, if you've got a partner, and if you're working with a partner on this project, you start talking to each other. One explains it to the other, and then explain it back and forth. If you don't have that partner, who do you explain it to?
A rubber duck.
The rubber duck sitting on top of your computer. And again, you can see my rubber duck sitting right there. That's why I put it up there, because it reminds you to start verbalizing things. Now, if you don't like, just talking to nobody, right, because you don't want to seem crazy, well, then fine, just verbalize it in your own head at least. The other thing that you mentioned before that was, it is difficult to get to develop that skill of being concise, right? But the 2 techniques that we just talked about today will help you get there. That free writing, of course, you'll have 50 pages of garbage, right? Then you go and reverse outline, and you find out that, well, this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph are all saying the same thing, right? Collapse them down, get rid of 2 of them, or take out the essential parts in 1, 2, 3, and there's your new paragraph, right? Cut it down, cut it down, cut it down. Right? That's what the editing and drafting process is all about.
I know we have some time left, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the Writing Center does, but do we want to
Yeah,
make questions about the assignment?
Any questions here or online? Let me check. Nothing online. No? All right.
We can go into the Writing Center. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am from the Writing Center. I'm an assistant director there. Basically, the Writing Center is a free resource for students, faculty, staff, for everybody on campus. We have a team of 20 undergrad and graduate writing tutors, or we call them writing consultants. Everybody's been trained. They take a semester-long course. They go through ongoing professional development. And basically what it is, it's anywhere across campus, right? Any stage of the writing process, whether you've just gotten an assignment or you are like really close to turning it in and just want some reassurance or some last minute touching up. It is a conversation with somebody else about your writing. So maybe you're talking to the rubber duck on your computer. Maybe you are talking to your roommate. Maybe, and sometimes I know this happens in college, you are still calling your mom and talking to her about your ideas. Your mom is probably very smart, but probably like has some other things to focus on besides your writing. So you should take it to somebody who gets paid to listen to you talk about your writing, and talk to your mom about a TV show or how much you love her or something like that. So come to the Writing Center instead, talk to us. Like I said, we work with writing at any stage of the process, all levels. We do frequently work with graduate students right alongside first-year writing students. A lot of times writing centers get a bad rap as like a remedial space where you go if you suck at writing. And I'm using air quotes there because as a writing teacher, I don't really think anybody like sucks at like I don't really good, bad writers. It's not really my thing. I just think about like we're all working on skills, right? And even somebody who's a very advanced writer writing books or novels or PhD dissertations is still going to be caught in like the mess of things, right? So it's not remedial. It's not like a punishment. It's not a place for bad writers to go. It's a place to get a second opinion, somebody to bounce those ideas off of. Honestly, sometimes I go to the Writing Center. Actually, on Tuesday, I had a Writing Center appointment where I was the writer, and literally my purpose was that there's something I've been putting off. I've been reading all this stuff for my PhD work, and I need to like write some summaries of it and start thinking analytically about it, and I just do not want to do it because it's a big mess, and I'm just like, I put it on the to-do list and I just keep avoiding it. So I made an appointment so that I would have 40 minutes where like somebody else was there so that I had to do it. And we sort of like talked through it. She took notes. I ended up with like a page of notes that she had taken as I had just told her about it, which was a great place when I went to start actually writing it, and wrote most of it this morning, in fact, because we set a goal for my next appointment with her, and now I will be shamed if I don't do it. So it's also just like a good exercise to get yourself started if you're having trouble just getting started or getting over your own kind of anxiety about writing, which is very common no matter what level you are at and no matter how much experience you have. You can also come in with academic or non-academic writing. So we do work with a lot of like cover letters, grad applications, job applications, stuff like that, scholarship applications. All of that stuff you can bring in, any kind of writing, presentations, that kind of stuff too. We work with a lot of different things.
And very, very timely too. Why? What's next week? The job fair, right? Career fair. Also, it's next week is E-Week. And so again, like I've said online, many of you are freshmen. Many of you may start thinking of yourself as not ready for an internship. No. A good chunk of our students get internships after their first year, in that first summer after their first year. And they are paid internships. They are very well paid internships. And even if you're not looking to get into an internship because you're waiting for COVID to be over and everything to get back to normal, it still is good practice to get your name out there. If you go to the Writing Center and they polish up your resume and CV, and you take it to those 50 employers virtually as PDF or whatever, however it's going to work, then they will put that on file and they will be calling you. She said that she was from Epic. I interviewed at Epic 10 years ago or so, and I didn't put in an application to Epic. I just met an Epic representative at the career fair, and I said, well, here's my resume. Right? And they called me and said, we want to fly you out to Wisconsin, Madison, right?
Yeah, just outside Madison.
Suburb of Madison, and we want to interview you, right? So simply getting your resume and getting your information out there on file means that you will be you'll be contacted instead of you applying to places.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, let's go to the next slide. So basically what will happen, this semester we are still all online. We don't know yet what will happen next semester. We're kind of just waiting for more information about that. Pre-pandemic, we were over in Andrews Hall, as well as we had night hours in the Adele Learning Commons. At one point, I think we had an engineering-specific satellite. I'm not sure if we're doing that anymore, but various locations around campus. Main location in Andrews Hall for the future. Right now, we are all online. So you can go to unl.edu/writing, and that will give you all the links you need to get to our scheduling software to make an appointment. Right now, we're doing 2 different kinds of appointments, and these sort of online things, I'm expecting we'll probably continue them after this semester, even though we will gradually have more face-to-face writing support, but they are so accessible, right? So we have online appointments, which are just video chat. We use a different platform, but it is quite similar to Zoom or any other thing you have used. There's a space in the middle where you can both look at the writing at the same time, and then there's a little video so you can see the consultant you're chatting with. That is a 40-minute appointment. And then we also have email feedback, which is called e-tutoring. It's clear if you look at the language on the website, it'll walk you through it. Basically that is you make an appointment, so it's in a particular time slot, but you just attach a draft and attach a rubric so the consultant knows what the requirements are, and then they'll read through your essay or your paper or your project and give you some feedback in the form of like comments on a Microsoft Word document, and send that back to you. In terms of what to expect, in addition to misguidedly thinking that the Writing Center is like a place for bad writers, a lot of times people also consider the Writing Center as like an editing service, like where you would drop off a paper and then like we'll fix it and then you come back later and it's all done, like it's dry cleaning. But of course it does not work that way, right? You are the person who knows that assignment the best, and also writing is not like even something as straightforward and concise and purposeful as a design document. Each of you are going to have a very different design document, regardless of how similar or dissimilar your code is, right? Because you're all going to have different voices, you're all going to have different ways of putting it, and writing the design document is going to be really helpful also in you figuring out what it is your code is doing, what the project is, right? So obviously all of these reasons that it is better if you have agency over your own work than just dropping it off and coming back and picking up your dry cleaning later, right? So what it'll be is you'll sit down with the consultant, if it's the online one, and you'll talk through the paper. They may ask you to read sections of it out loud so you can both sort of get a sense of what's going on, stay on the same page. And they'll ask you a lot of questions about what you're trying to say, about where you're struggling, and you'll work through it together. So rather than having somebody like tell you the answers, right, it's more working together to figure out what you're trying to say and what you want to do there, right? So it's more like a conversation. The same is true with the email feedback. Although you do send somebody something, they do not send it back to you with any changes. They send it back to you with some comments. And probably what will happen in those comments is they'll be asking you, did you mean this? What is your goal here? I'm not sure what you're saying in this spot. Really good job explaining it here. Maybe you should try the same method somewhere else. It'll be that kind of comment. So it is we do really emphasize like it's collaborative. The common refrain of writing centers is we're trying to make better writers, not better writing necessarily. So the writing hopefully gets better in that project, but in addition to that, you get some transferable skills and ways to approach the projects in the future as well. Further, what to expect and prepare for, besides preparing for somebody who's going to ask you a lot of questions and work with you and refuse to do it for you, probably also bring the rubric, some ideas about maybe the prompt if you have them for the class. If you have questions, things you're struggling with, you can bring those things too. But again, it is any stage of the writing process, so you can also just bring the prompt and be like, help, I am scared. And this is a normal thing that happens all the time in the Writing Center. We're ready to like work with you there. Our consultants are from all over campus, so it's not just like a bunch of English majors. They're from all kinds of different disciplines, and people are actually, in addition to that, we work with a lot of different papers a lot of the time, and we're sort of trained to approach different disciplines and different genres. We'll probably ask you to be sort of the disciplinary You'll be the person in the room who knows the most about your discipline, right? So we'll ask you some discipline-specific questions, but we'll work through it together regardless of what their, if they're undergrad, grad, or what their major is. Okay, any questions about the Writing Center from folks watching online or in this room?
Okay.
Cool.
Well, thanks to Charlotte, and thank you to the Writing Center, and good luck on your first draft this Friday. Remember that part of that, if you want the bonus points for the first phase, is that your test cases also need to be designed and handed in electronically. Right? But your draft your PDF will be handed in via Canvas, not the regular hand-in system. Because Canvas, we will go directly in there, like the Writing Center does, and say, this paragraph is great, this paragraph is terrible, right? Or this is not what we mean at all, right? Or don't use first person, or spell checkers are pretty ubiquitous now. Please pay attention to them, right? So good luck on that, and once again, thank you, Charlotte. And I'll see you next week.